lines of sequence 0, 1 at travels. We're getting in position locations. The reason why we're governing line signals to high course centers, lines of travel communications, and configuration of clockings is that generator is going to be off grid and online center location with settings. So go through FY line centers, lines of travels, endpoint lines of graph, and center core settings and graphing. Center lines is communication system, high lines of service. After that, we have Q&A and travel. Okay. So there's a lot of understanding that's already understood that we have to modify your system location and travel. How to get in that communication system is all through triangulation flux through a box line. Know exactly how to get in that position lines of high centers. This operates the sequence and hides its correlation setting to your system. Knowing exactly how to come into the mind of inception to its settings through a third drive. Triangulation is 3 centers of 3 set lines. Set position override sequence lines of 3 set lines. Setting line sequence, override line sequence, online set location of 3 driving communications, right? And then we get into the box screen inside travel, okay? So the position lines is routes, it's routers, and the lines of communication lines of flux over setting. Process lines of communication setting, yards and meters, meters and scale. That comes in its communication setting, hand lines of service. Set calculation lines of ground lines, sets all communication setting and travel, okay? Comes in position locations to its face recognition. Okay, everything has a face recognition. Your position, this is a face, this is a clock, this is a map, this is a cloak and dagger, this is a compass, everything is setting. Your triangulation will be turning into a pyramid itself. All through modification lines to a transformer. Boom. All right. The center core system adds lines of setting that processes communication lines as 24 angles. So it sets lines of female line and position of male line. Process calculation lines of 24 line and angles, 24 lines of signals, 24 lines of grounds, and 24 lines in set travels. Then we have 12 lines into or center lines of travel, directing lines of nebula. That crosses lines, calculation lines of 11, 10, set track lines of 9, and 8, and set lines of split lines of anomaly. Set 8 travel point lines of 8 over attractions, and 9 line division location of system and travel. So 9 and 8 lines. You can come into plus line screen adaptations because 9, 8, because you understand the travel communications. Sets lines of 17 point graphs into center core system and 3 lines of angles of flux over line in triangulations and correlations. Setting ground lines set position level measure and scale in the communication lines of schematics over setting. Process lines and high positional levels. Change the angle points, 3 communication lines of primer circuits, setting travels and point graphs. Setting course centers in a 4-line measure, set position of 5 set lines and 6 lines of sequence and travel. Directing ground lines of high center correlation system all through tractions. Okay. So indicating that is inside line rotation. Okay, how to modify that is to understand how to go through triangulations of settings, process of indication settings, with process lines of 1, L lines of travel communications. Okay, so we indicate how we use in a 4-line calculation setting at a 24 angle. The triangulation, the modification of the grounds, set position, location, setting, process lines, all line communications. So we got level line and single lines of 1. We got level lines and location lines into negative, position lines, and we have positive over negative, process lines of 2, plus over 2, negative equals lines of 0, process lines of 1, set position line travel. So getting the schematics is knowing how to come into the modification of the triangulation of its box, know exactly how to do through its flux, and know exactly how to go through its primer circuits, its prime mates. You guys are connected to your own prime mates. That's connected to the line sequence, and that puts all communication electrical line, screen adaptations, and wires and communications. The process of a communication system is knowing exactly how to go through 4 weather panels and travel. Set lines across, set lines of division, offline signal, off communications, in travels, in teleportation system. There's your vessel. Boom, right there in travel. Okay? Now change the I-line sequence, become the I-line division location of the system. The eyes and set tractions. Directing course centers in the 24 line grounds and set position line measure, scales its communication system all through travels. Flight navigation screen adaptations. There's space recognition right there in travel. Okay, so the schematics line screen adaptations, we take the 9 plus line and we take the 8 plus line and triangulation lines of 1 center, 1 traction. Process the indication system all through flux. Ground surface travels flux lines of 3 lines into pi generation screen. The operation line ground center locations adds 1/3 line, 1/2 screen. That position lines as pi's and 1/3 graph. Center core system is a 4 lines of screen adaptation. Process lines over a clocking system, seconds, minutes, and hours in frame and travel. Okay? Correlates to setting, graph communication inside travel communications. Okay? So it's about understanding how to use the schematics and how to go through triangulation line condition, which your eye is the visual location of a system all through calculations. Working within instructor to all levels to on position locations. So Friday in sequence lines of 6 line core centers. Your communication third eye will go triangulation line communication setting. 12 line signals on north, west, south, and east into 24 angles and position location of clocking into 2,400,000 lines of measure and scale. That processes the 24,000 line set settings and processes communication of seconds, minutes, and hours that frames its communication setting to its triangulation box. The process of communication setting, the eye becomes its own central drive. Okay, comes into its own third drive, comes into position location to its fifth drive, comes into all levels of sixth drive, comes into its 7 drive, right? That's a 7 drive sequence lines of 7 windows and fractal. Factors over line, evac, O lines, of course, and ETH lines of question, directing line ground centers, and travel point lines of graph and communication system all through tractions. Now, we got 17 lines of setting. Everything's in remote, in line coordinate setting, everything's in high core centers, and recharge, because I codify everything in travel. So it's 17 lines of scale, 16 lines of volume, thumbs up. That directs signal location setting and travel, points, lines of graph, and center core system all through travel communications. So you have to understand how to use everything that you have in position in real time. Use your phones, use your digital pads, use all communication, your TV lines, everything lines, letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols, comes together, location, your schematics, and screen adaptation, your triangulation box. All set, position, location, measure, and scale. Inside traction, okay? Because everything you do is nothing but a map, a simulation, inside traction, all right? You don't need to create these things because it's already done inside setting. You don't need to structure anything, it's already done. The body just has to understand why it's here in real time. Its purpose and its existing already in its system. All right, so coming into that, very complicated stuff. The clocking center changes the time measured scales, comes into phase direction of time center. Sets calculation lines, screen adaptation settings, process in position of its clocking system. Change times and centers and location all lines into real-time scale. Process the indication setting, ground lines of service, set position location system. Part acceleration goes around the position lines of flux. All right, through a half pipe of 1 lines of 6 and setting the overline sequence in another half pipe lines of position of 2/3 lines of 6 and set lines of high core centers and center core system and attraction. All through calculation, right? Now, directing lines of link is the process of communication setting. And remember, this is all done from your third eye lines of drive. So it's not a third eye, it's a third line drive, right? It's a central drive, it's a center communication drive. It's a hyper mode, it's a correlation setting, it's a interstellar mode. So your triangulation line condition setting is just coming into 24 angles and 12 centers of sequence. Even a triangulation of box doesn't matter because it has a 4-line signal, right? Sets course centers, line position all levels, 0, 1 equals 12, 12 equals lines, into set position of 0, okay? Ground line, earth line is setting and traction. Directing ground lines is across lines of 2 line angles, set lines of 3 over 4, and set traction. Directing ground lines, center lines of position of 2 measure, 3 scales, and 4 set position location and provision. Now the calculate modify high core centers over lines of screen adaptations of pi. The center core system of its compass comes in line screen adaptation system all through traction. Now directing line signals crosses the angle point lines of graph in a solar sail, dimensional sail, process lines of 2 angles, 4 centers, 4 angles, and 4 communication lines of surface. The process line to energetic dome screen adaptation cycles sets lines all communication setting in its ground lines and set tractions. Okay? Okay. So know exactly what's going on with the dimensional sail, the triangulation box. It's formulating its own system, its own tractions and settings, into its own calculation modify, into its own interdimensional system of its own system tractions. Now, directing line lengths has a core lines of track centers. We have on-line centers to a flux and 3 communication lines of pi, a clocking centers in position of all calculated modifying traction. The high line signals inside rotation sets calculation. Okay? I know it's a lot of understanding to be understood locations because it's already done through its equation. But you got to modify the ground centers lines of surface of travel to the eye line. That's the eye right here. That's the eye. That's the eye with inside the eye itself. Okay? Everything's done from the inside eye line, guys. Outside the line settings. The more you process the inside of the eye, the more you understand what's going through rotation spin and set track correlation setting at 24 angles. All right, so we send the course system, we change the calculation setting. Okay, it comes in all lines of planetary lines of 12 DNA track communications. All right, look at that. I did it again because the frequencies are too high. You can't see it yet. Now you see it. And then we cross the angles and have 4 lines of flux that change the triangulation of shift lines of anomaly. The galaxy shift line course centers add position location lotus into all lines of floweration of time center. So the eye itself is going to become its own life force. Now it becomes its own life force, it identifies its simulation of its own setting. The process is force recognition. The process of the communication setting is not exactly how it comes into its setting. The center core system comes into its atom. The center core activation line correlates and then it comes to its molecule. That's right. Your set position locations, your atoms, your molecules, your protons, your electrons, your neutrons, your photons, your neurons, and all correlates inside of your networks. Your neurological pathical line communication setting, your pathological system, your collagens, and screen adaptation system is coming into a third drive setting, into a fifth line in position of a sixth communication system, into a 7-line track lines of a J. Now that's a K line at L and an L line in the C. A process in that position of a kaleidoscope, set lines of tango, tango, foxtrot in track correlates and setting. So the third generation line screen adaptation is the third drive measure. Sets position lines of 5 in track communications inside traction. Right? Friday morning, 6 a.m. Okay, finding sequence line is the compass lines of screen adaptations of settings. The process communicates the setting to its console and travel into position all setting. Okay? The steering wheel. All right. Your central system goes in this angles, right? Sets calculation lines, setting communication in the high positions, right over left, setting calculations, left over right, and travel, right? But your center core system is high signaling. The central drive, the center communication lines of 3 drive, set lines of 3 centers in position of 6 over measure, 9 over scale, 12 line signals, and 24 angles in travel. So 3 centers in center drive, and I've got 24 angles in clocking screen and 4 angles in screen adaptations over cross location of the system. Process indicates in lines. So the clocking center changes lines of 24 over 3, 9 over lines, and 6 over measure, and clocking lines of 4 settings, north, east, west, and south. Process of an indication system, it's a mapping sequence through pi. Okay? Very complicated, but it's a lot of fun. So the correlation setting to the moon operates the signal location system that overrides the settings and line condition setting to a 9-charge mechanism lines of power. The operation screen adaptation lines of 6 over measure, scales position of 1/3, 1 tractions, 1 division, 1 locations into its webbing system of light and dark web and screen adaptation to its setting, all through flux. Flux over screen, webbing, screen adaptation, all levels of its Skynet and travel communications. Setting travel point lines of graph, center core setting lines of 24 angles, sets calculation setting, the triangulation in its box, and frame communication setting to the eye scepters and travel in communication setting in all levels at real time. Setting communication lines of grounds, sets calculation screen adaptations, overriding sequence and line screen adaptation system in track communications. Here comes in line screen adaptation to space of recognition. Okay? I did that already in sequence, but you have to understand it comes in its own phase recognition of time center. There's its face right there, inside division, inside traction, outside division locations. Okay? So it works with the Allspark, time measure, time line centers. This is where it comes into Iron Man, right? Now it's all lines of communication setting when you come in that position location, how you see that in tractions, know exactly how to use that in line communication setting. That's an iron mark, screen adaptation of center core centers in flux over 3, setting travels in point line graphs and line condition setting in geometric lines of scale in that process of communications, right? So the scrapnel, the core center is the line electrical line screen adaptation, the center core of Iron Man, where it has its setting location of a metal base. The metal base is a circular base. The process indication setting to its all position location to a system all through travel. The center core center line communication setting opens all the signals in line screen adaptation setting through its triangulation flux. And this is all through your eye, happening in set lines of sec lines, seconds, minutes, and hours, in frame communication lines, in the eye windows of box frames in travel communications. Ooh-ah. And remember, guys, it's all done through the eye setting, right here in tractions, right? So it's very powerful when you come into that. The shrapnel, the core centers, lines of travel. So if you get a position location line center, there's a coil communication lines that has a high position location of travel. You set 3 lines of metric meters and scale that processes communication setting all levels of question in its set position. So the question mark comes in 8 lines of screen adaptation. Processes lines of flux over line, crosses lines of angles in screen adaptation, over cross location settings, over line sequence location of all lines calculation, cross-reference lines of zero, process lines of triangulation, and position of box inside travel, inside calculations. All right, so the calculation lines in the all line communication setting. The flux has a 3-line center, has a 6-line division and a 9-line rotation into a 12 cycle. 24 angles comes in settings. You got 12 centers, 12 centers, 12 centers, 12 centers. Now that is the outline signals in rotations going this way in travel and track communications. Okay, that's the web. So the outline centers is coming into the web now. Sets coordinate lines of light, sets position of dark. Set position lines of dark, sets position lines of light. Line sets position of dark, dark sets position of light. 3 angle points, lines of webbing, graph, screen adaptation of plasma interference, sets lines of plasma using walls and core center location system, all through tractions, all through direct locations into your dimensional sail. See the dimensional sail? You see it? You see the moon line, you see the sun rotation lines of cycle. All right, so the dimensional sail correlates the center lines of 0, 1, offline center location of 0, 0, and track communications. Dimension of solar sail and travel. 3 indicates lines of settings, process communication line division, process line coordinate setting, and 3 lines of communication lines of attractions. The open window frames come at all levels of its interdimensional space in the window frame communication setting all through traction. Looking this way in travel communications. Okay, or looking this way in panels of operation. Okay, so the eye line center is going to go through this way. Remember the triangulation, but it goes in this way. Okay, that's where it comes into the center core of laser travel. Very powerful stuff, guys. Look at that. In the center core. Okay, so the conversion center of the eye itself is going to be mind interpretation, mind inception. So you guys are going to be inverted in all set position, your 12 angles. In line core centers, you have 24 angles. 24 lines of angles, line center outside of space, and 24 angles, lines of inside lines of space. Space and time, space line communication setting. 0, 1 that travels endpoint lines of graph, puts lines of Earth point 7. That's 7 windows in frame and track core centers. Setting communication setting in the center operation system in travel communication setting to its scepter in travel communications. Ooh. Okay. So that's the center dot, and then you come into the formation lines of its grounds, and then you come into your pyramids. You got your platforms of the grounds and set in sequence here. Very powerful stuff in travel. Okay, there's the platform. Then this becomes the security panels. The process, remember, it's all done from the eye line centers in travel communications. There's the wall sequence, and here's the ceiling. It rotates its settings, lines of triangulation, and its box becomes its own formation of its own interdimensional space of its holographic city and set travel. Okay? Inside and outside rotation. All through traction. Okay? So it's very powerful when you come into this and lines of calculation to its conception. All right? So when you get in that position, you understand the line setting. So you come into forefront, high division, low spectrum, low calculation, long screen. Direct lines equals lines of question. Question over lines, marks over screen, triangulation over box, box over flux. The center communication setting is a high lines of charge. Now it's a central charge, high lines of communications to a metric charge, and communication to a supercharge. Directing ground lines of setting to your eye receptor that change the formation setting of seconds, minutes, and hours in frame. And that's what your eye does to a 12 DNA structure. It changes its structure of design inside the eye line. Now the seconds and meters becomes the miles over lines that puts position location your model type. The drop its in its point lines of graph becomes its eyes of its windows of its frame and all communication setting to the inline, outline, outer circuits and its travel in communication setting through flux over screen. Okay, so it's constantly changing its shape. It's forming into itself of its own face, recognition and setting, right? Face here, right? So in that formation setting, you start to recognize what it is and all through travel, all through your flux of capacity and travel communications, your flux capacitor. Okay? So your flux capacitor changes timelines of centers in set position location in your systems, guys. It's a constant energy flow that has a high core centers to your third central drive, your 5 central drive, and then you can position location. How you drive a car through a standard is position location of standard H. But there is no standard 8. There is no standard 12. There is no standard 12. There is no standard 14. There's no in that position. But when you're in the dimensional mind and lines of 3 lines of angles and triangulation in the box, you can do any combinations of modification, space modulation setting into all levels into your track correlation setting, how you see yourself through mobility, how you see yourself through activation system, how you see your travels in communication space modulations, how you see yourself in your modules, how you see yourself in your pre-flights, and how you see yourself through navigations. All right. So the mono communication gets a true understanding of how to see the all communication setting. The triangulation comes in its own clocking center of travel. Okay, starting with the flux. And the box comes in position location also too and travel in 3 set positions of the flux. So the center core system has a line signal. Process lines of 1. Dimensional sail cross lines inside track correlation and DX lines of setting. Process indicates setting the ground lines of service in earth line and track communications. Now, directing communication lines has a tubing screen, the 3 centers in set position all levels. The particle system in travels in point lines is a torical system. The process lines of travels, direct lines of 1 center in that indicating system. This is a triangulation box, creates its own portal of its own wormhole in a 4 central setting in travel communications. Okay, so it becomes its own geometric of its own shape of its own system. So portals and wormholes is a line screen adaptation. That's 3 lines of measure in scale. Okay, 3 lines measure in scale throughout triangulation. Right, it's like looking at line communication setting through a train. Right, flux over line, and then we come into the location grid. Location grid comes in setting, and the location grid comes in set position. Right, so they come together in set tractions in 1 set track communications. Right. And set lines of all communication setting all through interdimensional of space. All right, interdimensional of space. So they link together in a process of communications to its flux in position of its solar generation system that sets 1 tubing and 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location come together in all position to its activation line of its clocking system all through settings and traction. Okay, it all comes together in 1. Okay, but it's very powerful when you start to recognize what's going on with its travel. Okay, in all center communication system, all through calculations, all different angles. All right. So when you bring it back home, it's back in its sequence, back in panel, back in operation setting. So I'm trying to get you to understand these things, how it works in all communications inside and outside lines of set position where the triangulation box changes the seconds, minutes, and hours in frame in position location, how you see yourself in set attractions, existing, evolving, and expanding and exploring in that position locations all levels, living all timelines all at once. So the triangulation is just coming in its own system, what it always is, its own flux, its own clocking system, and its own travel. That's all it is, guys, nothing else. Once you get into that, then you come into this, then you come into this, then you come into this, and then you come into mass, and then you see volume through interdimensional space. And the same thing with the box. Okay? Set position. Oh my gosh, look at that. There's the house. All right? So we expand the house. All right? So it's about understanding, seeing the inner line core to the outer line core, the intersection of the set position, location, measure, and scale sets all communication settings. So we have triangulation lines of 1. Okay, that process lines in set position, location, measure, setting communication lines in bold. Okay, setting over lines cross location and settings. Okay, setting lines of sequence and setting lines of travel. Okay, how it comes into all those at different levels. Comes in this position, comes in that position, location and setting. Right, all through triangulation. So the triangulation has to go through the 24 angles to come in its own system of its own travel. So once it gets in its own travel, it comes in its own webbing system. So working around the edges and core centers lines of travel. Okay, so I'm just showing you exactly how this all works in its center communication system inside tractions. Okay, so it's very powerful when it comes in that position. Okay, Now, once it gets to 24, it comes in its flux and setting lines of travel, direct lines of link. Okay. Your center core system changed the metric meters of scales, the seconds, minutes, and hours, change the system and line setting location of systems. Okay. So it's very powerful. Here you come into triangulation here, and you come into triangulation here, and you come in your box frame here. Okay. It's all done from the inline centers and the settings. Okay. And then you come in your circuits of your antenna and travel communications. Right. And then you come to your ground lines of service, the process of indicates and setting of 4 lines of flux. And they get a high core centers at equal lines and travels in point lines of graph. In that position location comes there its energetic dome and process lines, information system, and face recognition. Okay? All right, so we got pi generation lines of 1, panels over screen, panels over high core centers lines of travel. Okay? Now that directs lines of signals in a platform over line. The scales its communication system, all 3-dimensional system, in 4 settings, 1, 2, 3, and 4 lines of 5 platforms. Setting travels in point lines graph of panels of the communication setting of dimensional doors. So your triangulation box comes into its own dimensional doors of its galaxy shift lines of anomaly. There's the doors in sequence. All right, and then we change the high centers location system to the C lanes in travel communications. All right, so your triangulation is going all lines of all communication all at once now. So you're not seeing anything on a flat surface. You're always seeing 4 different angles, and how you see that, you cross the angles in that communication system that puts all levels of structure in its track communication system, all through calculations. All right. So there's so many ways you can do this in travel, in track communications. All right, different angles, different points, different graphs, different center core system lines of flux over line. So once you understand what you're doing, you know exactly how to work with the third line drive. Your center drive is a pi line. It correlates the signal location setting and offlines the signal locations to interception, to outline center location setting, and travel in position location to a system through face recognition. There's the face. Okay. So it's very complicated if you don't understand what's going on through travel. Okay. So it's very important to understand what's happening through travel, through your 3-dimensional line connection, your central drive, your main drive, your correlations drive, your IPA, your connections, your efficacy, your performance, puts all communication setting to your set position, how you see things measured. But it's all lines of all communications, guys. Everything has to have a flux capacitor. Your calculation lines is a ground line sequence location system, but it's all travels in point lines of graph in your position location, your setting. That's it, right? And these are your arms. Okay, and this is your body. It's attractions. Okay. Face recognition here. All right. Solar panel attractions, direct lines, energetic dome screens, adaptations of surface and travel. All right. So if we understand the core centers and we understand these 7 lines of set lines of flux, then we truly understand how to use that through conversion. That has a direct line link, a direct line panel. Now let's get into process of communication setting. We got 17 lines of measure. Remember, use your phones and your location lines of high signals. 17 lines of 9, sequence lines of panel, 9 lines of sequence lines of 3, 3 lines of triangulation, box frame and positional levels, box frame outline rotations, box frame inline outside line communication. Right? So your triangulation is just trying to understand where it needs to go, so it can just come into all levels of just expanding its system, what is already in provisions of through traction, right? Center core lines, connecting system, all through travel in your pyramid in set position. So your eye is just turning into a pyramid now. That's all it is. Okay, the astral projections, the astral travels, the astral connections, 45 angles, setting sequence lines of communications, setting overline say location setting, 45 flux over line, opposite angles and travel communications, right? But you're constantly working with the triangulation box that sets the code in different levels of travel in seconds, minutes, and hours and frame, okay? So when you get into that position, you come into the bandwidth. Now that's the streaming through longitude, latitude that basically puts every location setting to how you see things, location in your system, that elongates your settings, how you come into energized lines, flux over screen, flux over measure, flux over scale, flux over balance. So we all have to understand how to use that in a 3 central drive, right? So 3 central drive in flux, 3 centers, 5 measure, 7 scale. Okay, face recognition, right? Eye division, location and setting, intelligence. But it needs a set location. Everything is a face recognitions, guys. Everything's a face recognitions. Center core center, triangulation, position of box frame, travel. Energize, formulate the system, simulate the ground lines, core centers, lines of communication, lines of setting of security, lines of measure and scale. Right? So all you're doing is basically you're inverting your system. So let's get into profile calculations. Directing signal, set directions, all communication. All right. All right, so go to that settings. And process of communication line center locations. Okay, so we get in that set traction. Okay. All right, so we work with the eye lines. The eye lines, center lines, the signals, location of the system, all through travel. All right. So it center lines the inversion system. Okay, and tracks its communication outline setting. Center core system, and it sets all circuitries inside traction. Start with the measure and scale. Okay. Sets calculates lines of line signals in location setting to track communications. Starts with that setting. Okay. And then basically it comes in this set position, how you look at things. Direct and redirect and center operation. That opens up interdimensional system and travel. Okay, it's very complicated stuff, but you have to truly understand how this all works in travel communications. So you start to see the interdimensional of everything of time. See? See, that's the time. Look. See where your eye is in travel. It's seeing everything interdimensional now. So it clocks its system lines of communication system off the calculations. All right? But you always see it in 4 different angles. You don't just see it in one flat surface. But I know exactly how to connect and indirect. It's a center core system and eye centers. Comes in this directions in platform of communication in the center lines. Outline signals and frame communication. Very complicated stuff through the eye line. So the eye line sees the actual pyramid itself on all different angles of travel. Okay, it sees its expansion of what it is through communications. All through the eye line. So you're starting to see everything in set position. All through traction. There's your pyramid. Okay. So, very powerful stuff when you understand what's going on. So the connection setting, near-sighted, far-sighted, comes in one setting, one traction, one division, one locations. 4 panels of operations, summer, spring, winter, and fall, and set calculations. Directing lines, eye line centers, high lines of sequence, location setting, opens all signals. Your eye receptor comes inside rotation, outside traction at the same time in seconds, minutes, and hours in travel. Okay. And then you see what's going on with your pyramid inside setting. Okay. So your center system is now in the eye line setting in center core system. So that's a triangulation. And then you come into all frames. That comes into the box frame. How you see through window frames in a 7-line communication and travel. Okay. And center communications, eye tractions. There we go. All through signal. Okay. Very complicated stuff, but you see interdimensional of everything. And it's all calc can modify how you see things in travel through your vessel of communication. Okay? But it's all lines of all communication of you just coming into all what you already know and what you're coming into what you are in positions of is just expanding yourself in your 3rd drive, your center drive, your 5th drive, your 6th drive, your 7th drive of Earth 0.7 in travel. Okay? But it's amazing how you see through the eyes and what it sees in massive volume, guys. Mass and volume inside the eye. Boom. It sees interdimensional of everything. So when you're looking at water, you're seeing the holographic city of water. And you're seeing the intelligence walking in the water. You're seeing them on the boat, or you're seeing them in the skyline, or whatever in that settings, where they are in tractions, but you're seeing the interdimensional systems all at once. You're seeing everything through volume, and you're seeing everything through all levels of mass. All through the eye center set positions, that rotates this system all through tractions. Look at this in set position to expanding. Okay, very powerful stuff. How you start to understand what you're doing is you're opening up your eye of mass. See, that is your eye right here. This here is your eye expanding inside traction. It's complicated stuff when you really understand the cataracts and how it aligns the set position with its volume, sets communication system all through travel. There you go. Booyah. That's your eye expanding inside. Back in setting, back in sequence, back in panel, back in operation system, right? So that's your eye looking everywhere all at once, expanding itself, evolving itself, exploring itself. See, the thing is, guys, you have an Intel line screen adaptation that knows exactly what it's doing through tractions. Now, once you understand how to direct that, then you know exactly what you're looking at a triangulation. You're seeing the triangulation like this, right away in sequence. You're not just seeing the triangulation, you're seeing everything inside the triangulation of itself. You're seeing everything inside, and you're standing point of view in set position, right? So you're expanding your platforms now, guys. Okay, that's all you're doing through security set position. Okay, secure defense line, right? And then you travel through it. See, you're going into the interdimensional of its system, its eye itself is set position. Okay, so you're seeing massive volume all through the eye line. That's how your eye sees everything that you see. Square roots of pi and screen adaptations of flux over line, Earth line rotation lines of cycles, Earth tractions, directing center core system lines of calculations, over lines of expanding in exploration system all through track location expedition. So it's very powerful, seen through the eye itself. How it sees everything in mass. Okay? So when you get into the inversion system, you start to see the eye circuits, the eye central settings, you see the floaters. You start to recognize everything to the eye itself. You understand what's going on, position, location, your systems. You see the center core, which is the outer structure, right? Then you see the crevice. Well, the crevice is the outer core. You have an inner core to an outer core. And then liquid formation is the eye line setting, okay? And then you have a provision lines of cycles inside track correlation to your cataract. And then you got 12 line cycles inside rotation to the eye itself that rotates the system, rotating the routers and locates to a system all through travel. This is all through your eye in set position lines of travel. So you have to really understand what your eye really is. It's the Earth operation its cycle. It's sending all communications, sending and travel communications. So have a direct line is a line set location how you use a triangulation inside. Triangulation here, box inside through zero set traction. Okay? Now here I see the modification grounds. It has high core centers in positional creates line communications and portals in 1/6 lines of screen. So that correlates the system. Now they calculate and modify. In that line screen adaptation setting, sets a tether and it rotates the routers in screen adaptations of 3 centers in rotation system in its top rotation vessel. Process of indication setting has a flux screen over cross locations. That's where you come into the brain circuit, comes into the constellations to Orion's belt. That's to the eye line. Sets core centers in travel in point lines of graph to its umbrella and set tractions. Directing ground lines of grounds sets communication setting to its webbing system of light and dark web in travel communications. Now the brain comes in conversion lines at high centers, 3 signals and 3 grounds and set travel. Okay? This is all going through the eye lines. So how it reaches the high communication setting comes in oppositional location system. Now the eye itself, circuit lines of screen adaptations of flux over setting. Process its indication system comes into the brainstem. The brainstem is a 3 central setting of a circuit set lines of communication setting that high rises the visual location to ulls. Lacing lines of communication setting, snowy graph interference of its projection. Window frames and screen adaptations of flux over setting. Okay? So coming into that expansion, so we got that line centers and we ground the centers of surface 3 centers of travel and direct setting lines of grounds. The operation sequence changes the course centers, lines of travels in set position of 3 ion division location system in seconds, minutes, and meters of hours in travel. Sets communication setting. So your eye line is seeing lines of communications all in setting. This is your eye looking down in cross-line communications, right? That's your eye center, eye setting, eye operation, okay? And that's where you're seeing everything in its interdimensional space at all times, in real time, existing and evolving all at once. So you see everything interdimensional space inside the eye. Okay, there it is. That's what the eye is doing, see? It's seeing everything interdimensional. It's seeing everything above, it's seeing everything below, it's seeing everything across, it's seeing everything in locations in set position. There's the face recognition setting of the eye itself. So the eye itself is its own intelligence of its formation of its own system. That's why it is. It goes so far beyond. But if you look really close, you can actually see what it is in travel. Very powerful stuff. What it is in set position is nothing but a light bulb. So if you have a high center circuits, it grounds the lines of circuits, lines of course, centers, lines of travel, has a direct line link in set position, right? And then you come into this, in setting and travel, right? And then you come into this, right? There's a light bulb, right? Well, the center course system is what you're looking at in setting, right? So that's the interdimensional space that you're seeing. But the eye is this, getting bigger and bigger, how it sees things in volume, okay? So your eye center is here. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and expanding over time, all right? So the more it comes in, the more it sees the watts of the position of its expanding, of its interdimensional space and what it sees in travel. So it's very powerful when you see through the eye centers and track communications all at once. How it sees everything interdimensional space all at once. So you got 3 signals and 3 grounds as centers. And that comes into the pie, and it comes into its webbing system and travel communications. All through the eye centers of travel communication. Hooah! There's the eye. So there you go. The eye itself expands out of itself, modifies the system lines of travel of itself. So I've calculated and modified lines of course centers, lines of travels, metric meters over scale, balance communicates and setting, direct and redirect, setting lines of signal location setting all through travel in course center locations in line position of center operation. Ooh-ah. Complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun. See? That's all through the eye and how it sees. Okay? Very powerful stuff. And then you actually see the intelligence inside. You see the holographic cities. Let's get into cities. Let's get into buildings and travel. Okay, point lines of graph. Okay, people walking on the ground lines of surface and travel, right? You're seeing the schematics of the holographic city. Ooh. And you're looking at it this way in travel. Okay, so you're looking at your eyes in 4 lines of sequence all at once, inside rotation, all through expansion. And if you look really, really close, you can actually see the actual setting of the actual Earth itself is the eye itself in set position, the Earth. So this is your eye now, your eye here, looking here through expanding, all through its windows and 7 track communications. So it's looking at the other Earth line cycle. Sending lines of all communications, sending high lines of service, in set position lines of travel. The Earth itself. Okay? So when you invert your system and you start to understand how to use it through mind inversion, it comes into the inception of its dream, to its dreamer, to its dreaming. So it has a direct line link in its panels of operation to its setting through sequence. Clock in your system is knowing exactly how you see lines at different angles, the triangulations of box. So the position locations to its cycle. The high course centers, line condition setting, is the eye receptors. Top center in position of bottom setting. Process lines and high communication system all through travel. So in that position, this is what's going to be inside and outside at the same time. Okay, so you're going to see a triangulation set position. And then you're going to see it on a different angle in set position and travel all through the eye inside. Face recognition's there, face recognition's there, face recognition's there, face recognition's there, and face recognition's there. Okay? All through the inside of the eye. So the eye itself is a set position location of travel, guys. Has its own face recognition system, lines of calculations. Very powerful stuff in travel. Okay? So it formulates and travels out through the equations of 3 centers. Sets position locations into 4 centers. Set position lines of 6 centers in travel. Then it modifies 9 line centers, travels in point lines of graphs to 3 lines of 4 lines of measure, 5 lines of scale, 6 lines of calculation screen. So that is a lot of set position of travels all through face recognitions and time setting. Process in that communication comes in teleportation vessel into its track correlations. Okay? Inside. See, the intelligence inside now. The intelligence inside. Okay, that hovers everything. So everything in mechanism is created from inside the eye line. That's where you see the faces of recognition inside, controlling everything that modifies the system of your Earth outside in travel. Your Earth, right? Teleportation vessel. So you're constantly changing metric scales in your clocking systems into 24 angles and split lines of communications. Very powerful stuff. And again, you're seeing it through the eye, right? This is the eye. Looking through its setting, through expanding. Okay, that's the eye looking this way, right? So it sees the teleformations and now it's changing its measure and scale in its setting, right? And then it's expanding more of the eye in central setting, inside location and mind of inception. Okay? But you start off with the 4 angles first in travel, how the eye is seen this way, and how the eye, okay, is seen this way, and how the eye, okay, is seen this way, and how the eye, okay, is seen this way. Okay? It's all levels of expanding. So the more you go into the eye itself, the more you see the self of the earth of itself through the eye itself. That's the eye looking at the earth. So that's the eye looking at its earth below. Boom. What it sees in seconds, minutes, and hours in real time. Existing and evolving and expanding all at once. Just to the eye central settings, its dimensional lines of position. So that's where it comes in thermal, and that's where it comes in X-ray, and that's where it comes into levels of foxtrot. Knowing exactly what you're doing through your echo liners, your connection, your sonars, how you calculate and modify, how you actually see your Earth in travel. Okay? All right, we'll stop there in travel communications. All right, setting sequence is 10:02 and set lines of travel. See you guys in 5.